Top 5 Best presents Real Life Hermit lived isolated from society for 27 years and how one mistake changed it all. To add to your day just a bit, subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell for more shocking videos just like this one every day. Have you ever just wanted to get away from it all? For many of us, life stresses can really get to us over time. In fact, the World Health Organization just officially declared burnout to be a real, treatable mental condition. Probably only treatable by pina coladas on the beach, you know what I'm saying? So making sure we get enough time away to refocus our mental state is not only a good thing, but a necessary thing for our health. But for some people, the stresses of life require just a little more than a week or two away from the grind. Like, maybe a month, or 2, or 27 years. There are a few people out there that simply reject society as we understand it and choose instead to separate themselves from it. And as you might expect, those people oftentimes have very interesting stories, as it takes a very interesting person. And one of these interesting people in particular has an equally unusual ending. And I get it. Our society can be pretty dark at times. It really does take a special someone to reject society as a whole. And one man decided that he needed to get away from society and its structures. And he didn't settle for a week off from work, let me tell you. Instead, he hid from the world for nearly 30 years. When he was finally found, no one could believe his story. And they say no one needs a vacation more than somebody who just got back from vacation. And yet, Christopher Thomas Knight, known as the North Pond Hermit, took that a little too seriously. Raised in Albion, Maine in 1965, Christopher had a relatively normal upbringing for the most part. Christopher always had a hard time relating to other people, especially his peers. You don't say. He preferred enjoying his own company to spending time with others. But even though he mostly kept to himself, he was smart and his future looked promising. Yet, in 1986, just as his life was supposedly coming together, Christopher ran away from everything he knew. His desire to escape society was so strong that he didn't even tell his family or work what he was doing. In fact, with no map and no compass, it's doubtful even he knew where he was going. And after driving in no particular direction, Christopher ditched his green Subaru, leaving the keys in the ignition. Armed with a tent and a backpack, he began his trek into the unknown. But there was just one problem. He had no experience living in the wilderness. He spent his first 2 weeks simply traversing the Maine forests. But he soon realized how ill-prepared he'd been, especially when it came to getting food. He had no weapons to hunt, and he was forced to eat berries, which were harder to find than expected. Christopher eventually realized he would have to break into nearby cabins for food while the inhabitants were away. At first, he stole mostly from their gardens, hoping they would think it was a wild animal who took their vegetables. Simultaneously, Christopher soon began to deal with the harsh elements in the Maine wilderness. His tent would no longer suffice. And so, one night, he decided to sleep in an empty cabin. Too afraid the owners would return to find him, he decided to sleep outdoors from that point onward, no matter how bad the weather. Christopher did eventually find an area to stay. It was so off the beaten path that he knew no one would ever just stumble upon him. And soon, he began to fully embrace the life of isolation he made for himself. After creating a structure to live in, he did his absolute best to keep quiet at all times, for fear that someone, somehow, would hear him. And all the while, it was common for Christopher to break into surrounding cabins and steal whatever food and drinks he could find. Over time, he became a skilled and stealthy thief. Even homes with alarm systems were no match for the man who used to install them for a living. Only when he was 100% certain no one was around would he dare to enter their home, sometimes taking spare keys so he could get in easier the next time. Christopher was always sure to only take what he needed. He sounds like a borrower. Any obvious moves would surely give him away. He mostly took snack cakes, bars of chocolate, and sodas, like Mountain Dew. He also sounds like a teenager. This way, he could keep himself from losing too much weight and succumbing to the elements. But eating wasn't his only concern. He also had to maintain his shelter. So, he stole tarps and blankets and coats and whatever else he could find. He also pilfered magazines, not only to read, but so he could also rip out the pages, lay them on the floor, and soak up any possible moisture. Christopher was sure to leave as little evidence that anyone had broken into the home as possible. Though he didn't break any windows, he did often remove doors, only to reinstall and repair them once he had the supplies he needed. This way of life continued for him for nearly 3 decades. But over time, no matter how precise Christopher tried to be, the inhabitants of the homes began to notice things missing, as well as a number of damages done to their homes. Christopher soon began to even break into homes at night. Residents of North Pond, Maine, would often report having heard strange noises around their property during the evenings. Yet they could never spot an actual intruder. Oh, that sounds so creepy. Just imagine, they're like sleeping, and somebody comes in. No, thank you. Though they just go back to sleep, they woke up to find random things gone from their house. Most people reported missing various items to the police, including books, magazines, pants, boots, radios, batteries, and junk food. That's when police focused their efforts on finding whoever was breaking into the homes. It wasn't long before people began giving him various monkey ears. These included not only the North Pond Hermit, but Maine's Loch Ness Monster, and my personal favorite, the Stealthy Yeti. Soon everyone in North Pond was installing surveillance cameras in their homes. Yet, no matter what, he could seemingly break in and get out without ever being seen. And without anyone to pin a crime on, all the police could really do was file a report, and they referred to Christopher as the Hermit. However, police caught their first big break when Christopher decided to break into the Pine Tree Summer Camp. An obvious choice, since it was stocked with all the tools and food anyone would need to survive in the wilderness. And there was a low chance someone would notice items missing. But what Christopher didn't know is that the police were hot on his trail. The facility was managed by Sergeant Terry Hughes, who had a plan to catch the North Pond Hermit. He installed industrial-grade floodlights, military-grade motion sensors in the kitchen, and a whole lot of food. When alarms started going off on April 4th, 2013, Sergeant Hughes leaped into action. When he arrived in the kitchen, fully expecting a burglar with weapons, he was shocked to find a seemingly normal, middle-aged man. I mean, really, was he that shocked, though? Like, all he was doing was stealing food. Why would he need a bunch of weapons? Anyway, when Sergeant Hughes demanded the criminal to get to the ground, he immediately complied. As he got down, candy fell onto the floor from his backpack, and the man had no identification and didn't want to answer any questions. After 2 hours of questioning, Christopher finally began to open up. Investigators were shocked to learn he was living in isolation for 27 years. The level of discipline he showed while he broke into houses is beyond what most of us could remotely imagine, Sergeant Hughes said. In an interview, Christopher once admitted that in his 27 years living in isolation, he only interacted with one person, a hiker making their way through the Maine wilderness. And what did he say? Simply, "Hi." On October 28, 2013, Christopher pleaded guilty to 13 charges of burglary and theft at Kennebec County Superior Court. But what shocked people the most was that for his crimes, which was about upwards of 1,000 break-ins, he only received a 7-month jail sentence. Additionally, he had 3 years of probation, had to meet with a judge every Monday, and pay each of his victims $1,500 in restitution. Furthermore, the judge demanded he took part in a program for people with mental health issues. While serving his jail sentence, Christopher made a real effort to reconnect with his family that he abandoned without so much as a goodbye all those years ago. When he was finally released, his brother offered him a job. Of course, with such a unique story, it was only a matter of time before someone wrote a book about it. Just recently, Michael Finkel, an American journalist, wrote the book The Stranger in the Woods after interviewing Christopher while he was still incarcerated. By the end of his journey, Christopher had all but lost who he was. When I applied my increased perception to myself, I lost my identity. There was no audience, no one to perform for. There was no need to define myself. I became irrelevant, he explained. Well, that certainly turned around. Christopher became very relevant after his story went public. Thank you for watching. Tap one of the 2 videos on the screen for another shocking story.